I wasn't a grandmother anymore. I was a schedule. That's the only way I can describe it now, looking back. My days had stopped belonging to me somewhere between the first time my daughter-in-law, Melissa, called at 7 in the morning to ask if I could pick up the kids, and the 100th time I said yes without thinking. I don't know exactly when it happened. That's the thing about slowly losing yourself. There's no single moment you can point to. One day you're a person with a life, and then one day you're not. And the distance between those 2 days is so quiet you almost don't notice it passing. My name is June. I'm 63 years old. I live in a 3-bedroom house in Guelph, Ontario, the same house where I raised my son Daniel and where my husband Frank and I planted a Japanese maple in the backyard that's now taller than the fence. Frank passed 4 years ago, sir. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to gone. There are things that break you cleanly and things that break you slowly. And losing Frank was both at the same time. Fast and also never finished. The grief still moving through me in waves I don't always see coming. After Frank died, Daniel and Melissa lived 40 minutes away in Waterloo. They had 2 children, Lily, who was 7, and James, who had just turned 5. I loved those kids in the way you love something that still has all of its life ahead of it, fiercely, almost painfully. And I love Daniel. Still do. He's my son. That never changed, not even through everything that happened. But, Melissa, that's where I have to slow down and be honest, because it's easy to make her into a villain and harder to tell the truth, which is more complicated than that. Melissa Hargrove. That was her name before she married Daniel, and she kept it hyphenated. Melissa Hargrove Chen, which I always respected, was a project manager at a tech firm downtown. Long hours, real pressure. Daniel worked in engineering and traveled sometimes, 2 or 3 days at a stretch, which left Melissa managing school pickups and pediatrician appointments and homework routines mostly on her own. I understood that. I genuinely did. What I didn't understand, not for a long time, was how gradually I had become the solution to a problem I hadn't been asked about. It started small, the way these things do. A Thursday afternoon in October, 2 years after Frank died, Daniel called and asked if I could get Lily from school because Melissa had a late meeting, and their usual arrangement had fallen through. Of course I said yes. I was her grandmother. I wanted to. Then it was the following Tuesday, then Friday. Then it was every week, twice a week, sometimes 3 times. Then it was James, too. Then it was Saturday mornings, when Melissa wanted to go to the gym, and Sunday afternoons when they had things to do. Then it was March break, and then it was the week before Christmas, and then at some point it was just assumed, not asked, assumed, that I would be available whenever they needed me to be. I kept a small notebook in my kitchen drawer. I'd started it as a way to track Frank's medications, and after he died I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, so I started using it for other things. Grocery lists. The name of a book a friend recommended. Little notes to myself. Around the 2nd year I started writing down the days I watched the children, not as a complaint, just because I like keeping track of things. It helps me feel like time is real, like it's actually passing and I'm in it. By last spring I had watched Lily and James, on my own, at their house or mine, 67 times in 14 months. 67. I didn't tell anyone that number. I just kept it in the notebook and looked at it sometimes when I was standing at the sink doing dishes, and I would think, is this what I am now? Is this what my days are? Don't misread me. I am not the kind of woman who resents her grandchildren. Lily had started calling me Grammy June, and she drew pictures of the 2 of us at the park and taped them to her bedroom wall. James couldn't say his R's properly yet and called me Guami, and every single time it made something in my chest loosen in the best possible way. Those children are part of my heart. I would have chosen to spend time with them. That's exactly the point. I would have chosen it. Choosing and being scheduled are 2 very different things, and somewhere along the way, the choice had been made for me. Melissa never said thank you. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I'm not talking about a formal thank you, a card, or a gift. I mean, she never just looked at me and said those 2 words. Not once in 14 months. When I dropped the children off, she would take them inside and ask about their day and close the door. When she texted to ask if I was available, and she did text, she didn't call. It was always a text. Something about that always felt like a small erasure. It was never framed as a question. It was, Can you get the kids Thursday? I have a thing at work. Not, would you be able to? Not, is that okay? Just, can you? Which in practice meant, you will. I talked to my friend Audrey about it once. Audrey and I have known each other since our children were in elementary school together. And she is the kind of person who tells you the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. June, she said, over coffee at her kitchen table. You have to say something. I don't want to cause problems. You already have a problem. You're just the only one carrying it. She was right. I knew she was right. And I kept not saying anything. Part of it was Daniel. He was my son, and I didn't want to put him in the middle. I knew that if I said something to Melissa, it would become something Daniel had to manage. And Daniel had always been a person who shut down under conflict, who went quiet and careful, and tried to make everything smooth until it was, even if making it smooth meant leaving things unaddressed. He was like Frank in that way, actually. Frank could smooth over anything. I used to love that about him. Later I understood it had a cost, and part of it, the part I'm less comfortable admitting, was that I was afraid. Not of Melissa exactly, but of what would happen if I became difficult. There are grandmothers who get pushed out. There are women my age who stopped seeing their grandchildren because of a disagreement that calcified into silence. I had watched it happen to a woman at my church. Her daughter-in-law stopped returning calls, and then there were always reasons the kids couldn't come. And then one day she told me quietly over coffee that she hadn't seen her grandson in 8 months. 8 months! He was 3. I was terrified of becoming that woman. So I kept saying yes. I kept getting in my car and driving the 401 and picking up Lily and James and feeding them dinner and reading to them and loving them. And I kept coming home to a house that was very quiet and telling myself, this was fine. This was what family meant. This was love in practice. And I kept not sleeping well. It was Frank who finally said something. Not literally. Frank has been gone 4 years. But I have these moments, usually late at night, when I'm almost asleep and my mind goes very still, and I can almost hear him. Not his voice exactly. More like the way his mind worked, the particular logic of him. Frank was a patient man, but he had a threshold, and when he reached it, he would say, very calmly and without drama, enough. I heard that word in April, on a Tuesday night, after I had driven 40 minutes to Waterloo, because Melissa had a work dinner, and Daniel was in Calgary, and the regular babysitter had canceled. I'd had a dentist appointment that morning, and a physiotherapy session in the afternoon for my shoulder, which had been giving me trouble. And by the time I got home at 9:30 and sat down in my kitchen, I was tired in a way that went past my body. I was tired in some deeper place. I opened the notebook. I looked at the number. Enough. I sat with that word for a long time. I had a friend years ago named Patricia Webb. She moved to Victoria, but we still exchange cards at Christmas. And she had always said that the best thinking she ever did was when she gave herself permission to want something without justifying it first. I had thought about that a lot since Frank died. What did I want? Not what was reasonable. Not what was fair. Not what would minimize disruption. What did I actually want? I wanted to go to Niagara-on-the-Lake. I know how that sounds. Of all the things I could have wanted. But Frank and I had talked about it for 15 years. It was one of those trips that keeps getting pushed back for sensible reasons, and then one day the person you were going to take it with is gone. We'd wanted to go in the spring, when the orchards were blooming. We'd wanted to stay somewhere small and walk along the water and go to a winery and sit outside and do nothing in particular. We'd never gone. I opened my laptop and I looked at inns. There was one called the Sherwood House. Not the real name, but close enough. A small place with 12 rooms and a porch that looked out over the vineyards, about a 15-minute walk from the lake. They had a room available for the last week of May, 7 nights. More than I had ever spent on myself since Frank died, more than felt rational. I booked it before I could talk myself out of it. I didn't tell anyone. Not Audrey, not Daniel, not Melissa. I just put it in my own small notebook, on the page after all the dates I'd written down, and I looked at it, and something in me went very still and very calm. Not angry, not defiant, just decided. The weeks between booking and leaving were interesting. I watched myself from a slight distance, curious about my own behavior. I kept saying yes to things. I didn't suddenly start refusing. I wasn't trying to make a point. I said yes when Melissa texted about the kids on a Saturday. I said yes when Daniel called and asked if I could have the kids for a long weekend at the beginning of May so he and Melissa could go to a wedding in Ottawa. I said yes, and I meant it. And I went and I loved those children. And I also knew that in 3 weeks, I was going to be sitting on a porch in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and no one would know where I was. The morning I left, a Sunday, I got up at 5:30 and made coffee and sat in the kitchen in the quiet. The Japanese maple outside the window was just starting to come in, new red leaves very small and bright. Frank had planted it the spring before Lily was born, said he wanted something that would still be there for the grandchildren to climb. He didn't get to see either of them. I looked at that tree for a long time. I left a note on my kitchen table. Not for Melissa. For myself, it said, "You are allowed to have a life." I know that sounds dramatic. It didn't feel dramatic when I wrote it. It felt necessary. I turned my phone to silent. Not off, I'm not reckless, but silent. And I got in the car and I drove south toward the lake. The first 2 days were uncomfortable in a way I hadn't expected. I kept reaching for my phone out of habit, kept waiting for a text that said, "Can you?" Kept feeling like I should be somewhere I wasn't. The inn was exactly as described, small, quiet. The room smelled like old wood and lavender, and from the window I could see rows of vines going up a gentle slope. On the first morning I sat on the porch with coffee, and I felt guilty. That's the honest truth. I felt guilty for being there. But guilt is interesting. If you sit with it long enough without feeding it, it starts to thin out. By the second afternoon I had taken a long walk along the water and stopped for lunch at a place where they served fish tacos and a local pilsner, and I sat outside in the sun and watched the boats go by. And for 1 full hour I didn't think about anyone but myself. That felt strange, and then it felt good. On the third day my phone started going. The first text was from Melissa. It came at 8:14 in the morning. "Hey June, just checking in. Daniel said he couldn't reach you yesterday? Everything okay?" I read it. I didn't answer. An hour later, "June? Can you call when you get a chance?" Then Daniel, "Mom, Melissa says she's been trying to reach you. Are you all right? Call me." I called Daniel that evening. He answered on the first ring. "Mom, where are you? We've been worried." "I'm fine," I said. "I'm on a trip." A pause. "A trip? What trip? Where?" "Niagara-on-the-Lake. I'm at a little inn. I'll be home Sunday." Another pause longer. "You didn't tell anyone you were going." "No," I said. "I didn't. Mom, Melissa was trying to reach you because Daniel." I said it gently. "I'm on a trip. I'll be home Sunday." "I'll call you when I'm back." There was a silence on his end that had several layers to it. I could hear him sorting through them. "Okay," he finally said. "Okay. Are you actually all right?" "I'm sitting on a porch looking at a vineyard," I said. "I'm the best I've been in a long time." The next morning, there was a text from Melissa. Longer this time. "June, I have to be honest, this is really inconsiderate. I've been counting on you this week. I have a huge presentation Thursday, and I've been planning to ask if you could do school pickups. I didn't think I'd have to go through some emergency scramble trying to find coverage. A heads up would have been really nice." I read that text 3 times. The first time I read it, I felt a spike of something hot and sharp. Anger. Yes, but also something like recognition. There it was. What had been invisible was suddenly visible. She had been counting on me. She had been planning to ask me, not planning to ask if I was available. Planning to ask, with the answer presumed. Even now, even here, the ask was a formality and the assumption was the reality. The second time I read it, I felt sad. The third time I read it, I understood something about myself that I hadn't quite seen before. I had made this possible. Not by being kind. Kindness isn't the problem. But by never once saying I need notice, or that doesn't work for me, or I have things too, Melissa. I had been so afraid of the cost of saying no that I had erased the possibility of a no existing at all. And in doing that, I had accidentally erased myself. I didn't answer the text that day. I went for a long walk in the morning, and I found an orchard just starting to bloom. Later than usual that year, the man at the gate said, "Cold spring," and I stood in it for probably 10 minutes just looking. There's a particular quality of light in an apple orchard, in bloom, that I can't describe properly except to say it does something to time, makes it slow down and soften. Frank would have loved it. I stood there and let myself miss him without rushing to stop. In the afternoon, I went to a winery and sat at a small wooden table outside and drank a glass of Riesling and watched the clouds move over the escarpment. A couple at the next table were probably in their 70s, laughing at something on his phone, her hand on his arm. I looked away. That evening, I called Audrey. She said you were inconsiderate. Audrey's voice had a specific quality it gets when she is very carefully not saying everything she's thinking. She said it was inconsiderate not to give her a heads up. About your vacation, yes. A beat. June. She was planning to ask you, without having asked you, and you're the inconsiderate one. I know. Did you answer her? Not yet. Good. Wait until you're home. Don't do it from there. I took that advice. I stayed the rest of the week. I finished the book I'd brought. A novel about a woman who restores old furniture. The kind of quiet, absorbing, read I hadn't had time for in months. I ate breakfast on the porch every morning. I slept without waking at 3 a.m. to worry about things I couldn't control. On Saturday morning, I sat down and thought carefully about what I wanted to say when I got home. Not what would be most satisfying to say, what needed to be true. I drove home Sunday. The maple in the backyard was fully. By then, the red leaves catching the afternoon light. I sat in the driveway for a minute before going in. Then I called Daniel and asked if he and Melissa could come over Tuesday evening. Just them. I'd suggested Audrey could take the kids for a couple of hours. I said I had some things I wanted to talk about. They came. Melissa arrived with a particular energy, held tight, the way a person looks when they've been rehearsing what they're going to say. Daniel looked careful. He sat on the couch and put his elbows on his knees, which is what he does when he's bracing. I made tea. I didn't rush. Then I sat down across from both of them and I said, I want to tell you what the last 14 months have looked like for me. I didn't have the notebook in front of me. I didn't need it. 67 days are not something you forget. I told them the number. I watched Daniel's face. He hadn't known. I could see that clearly. He genuinely hadn't kept track, hadn't added it up. He looked at Melissa, and she looked at the table. I don't say this to make you feel bad, I said. I say it because I need you to understand that I have a life. I had a life before any of you needed me, and I want to have one now. I want to be your grandmother, I said, looking at the door, past it, to the children upstairs at Audrey's, and I want to be your mother. But I cannot be your solution. I need to be asked, not assumed. I need to be thanked, not taken for granted. And I paused. I'd thought about this part the most. I need you to understand that when I say no, that's not a failure on my part. That's just me being a person. The room was quiet for a while. Melissa said, not defensively but quietly. I didn't realize it had gotten to that number. I know, I said. I've been really stressed, she said. I know that too, I said. And I'm sorry you have been. I want to help. I just want to help in a way that doesn't hollow me out. Daniel said very quietly. Mom, I'm sorry, I should have been paying attention. That was the thing that almost broke me. Not Melissa's explanation. Not even the 67 days. Daniel saying I should have been paying attention, in that quiet voice, the voice that sounds most like Frank. I had to press my hands flat on my knees to hold myself together. We talked for a long time after that. It wasn't a perfect conversation. There were moments where Melissa got a little defensive, and moments where Daniel got a little too conciliatory, which is his version of conflict avoidance, and moments where I had to remind myself that I wasn't trying to win anything. I was just trying to be seen. By the end, we had agreed on some things. I would be actually asked with enough notice, when they needed me. I would have set days I was available, and days I wasn't, and both would be respected. Melissa said she would do better with expressing gratitude, and she said it plainly, without the edge I'd braced for. Daniel said he was going to be more present so that I wasn't filling a gap that was really his job to fill. Were those promises kept perfectly? Not always. This is real life, not a tidy story. But things did change. They changed in the way things genuinely change, which is gradually and imperfectly, and with occasional backsliding and occasional surprising moments of grace. The first time Melissa texted me after that, 2 weeks later, asking if I was free Saturday, she said at the end, "No pressure at all if you have plans." 5 words. They shouldn't have meant as much as they did, but they did. Lily is 9 now. James is 7, and has mostly sorted out his R's, though every once in a while when he's tired, he still says Guami, and I never correct him. Last month, the 3 of us baked a rhubarb crisp using the recipe Frank's mother gave me 40 years ago. And James licked the spoon and said it was the best thing he'd ever eaten, and I thought, This is what I almost traded for a schedule. I'm going back to Niagara on the Lake in September. Audrey is coming this time. We're going to the same inn, same porch, same vineyard view, and we're going to drink too much Riesling and stay up too late and sleep without anyone needing anything from us. And I'm going to sit in that orchard and let the light do what it does. And I'm going to think about Frank, and I'm going to think about all the things I still want to do, and none of those thoughts are going to feel like stealing. I have a life. I always did. I just needed to remember it was mine.